So I was just like, I'm out the door before those kids for school. So I was like, somebody have combed his hair. Right. It's just like distance apart, but it's kind of reform us, whatever. He wanted to participate. I really, he came home today. I was like, okay, good, your dad is not. Like, you can do that.
No, I'm just gonna open it up and then kick it off to Brett. Well, welcome everyone. It's 6 o'clock, so I'm gonna call to order our special meeting of the City Council and the Planning Commission to discuss the findings from our recent land quantity needs analysis. As this is more of a workshop and a discussion between council and our Planning Commission. On the agenda, we don't have an opportunity for public comment. However, I'm glad that you're here to listen to the discussion of the analysis. And with that, I want to turn it over to Brett Lucas, our Director of Planning, to kick this off. Go ahead, Brett.
Yeah, greetings, planning commissioners and council members tonight. Welcome to tonight's joint session. Again, the purpose of tonight's workshop is to discuss the recent findings from the land quantity needs analysis that is being completed for the city of Cheney. Really, we're looking tonight to figure out how much buildable land exists within the city's UGA and the city limits, and the demand on those land resources for both residential and employment going forward for the next 20 years based on our known population projections. Again, tonight's focus is at the 30,000 foot level, high level, looking at the overarching direction of the city. While this workshop is purely informational, we are looking for some direction and guidance, both the city staff and to our consultants, as we move forward. So with that, I'd like to welcome Aaron McCarr with STJ Alliance to discuss the findings. Thank you.
Thanks, Brett.
I'll get you.
Yep.
Thanks. Hi, everyone. My name's Aaron Mercar, you guys said. With SCJ Alliance, we're the consultant working on the land quantity needs analysis. And our sub-consultant, Points Consulting, we have a few people on Zoom joining us today. They've been very helpful in our baseline analysis work for this project. So if there's any questions throughout this presentation, please just let me know. And we do have some discussion points at the end of the presentation that will kind of lead into the discussion part of this. So I'll run through the presentation and then we can get to discussion. Okay. So our agenda today, we're going to talk about the project goals and the context. We'll talk about our progress so far, the highlights from the baseline report, the buildable lands methodology. So there's a whole methodology. I'll try to cover it as briefly as I can. And then some assumptions that we've made from that directly impacted the results. So those are an important piece of this process. The preliminary findings of the buildable lands analysis, and then we'll get into our discussion points and follow up after that. So as you probably know already, the goal of this project is to assess the state of Cheney today and get a population projection through the year 2045. And that's the year that we're looking at. How much land capacity do we have through that year? The project also aims to determine the residential and employment capacity of Cheney within its current land use regulations. So looking at your land use map now and looking at the buildable lands and comparing those, what your densities are and how much capacity you have to grow. We'll analyze the housing needs of the community today and into the future, also the economic opportunities of the city as it grows, and then provide recommendations. So that will inform your comprehensive plan update, which is due in 2026. So that is coming right up. So a little context why we're doing this and how will this help us? So kind of what's the point of this? So the study will provide a baseline analysis for to all the decision makers to make those decisions about the future of Cheney, especially during this next periodic comp plan update. The recommendations will also provide guidance for future policy decisions and compliance with state laws. So we're looking at what are the state laws that we have to follow? What direction is the state going in with housing and land use, and also looking at what Cheney wants to be. Or this is also going to help us answer questions about the urban growth area. So UGAs are designated within, as you know, within where urban growth can happen and cannot occur outside of those boundaries. So this analysis takes a good look at your current UGA and the potential and capacity for that. And we want to kind of have some takeaways from this group tonight about what the future of that should be. So land quantity analysis is looking at how much buildable land. So this looks at vacant, underutilized, and partially utilized land. So I'll define those all in a little bit. And then the capacity exercise will help determine the needs for change in land use policies such as densification or UGA expansion. So there's some options about how you can grow that are important to consider now. So far, we've completed a baseline report. So this is looking at just basic information and demographics about Cheney. We've coordinated with the Spokane County PTAC, which is the advisory committee to look at buildable land methodologies countywide. Our methodology we took from their draft methodology that I think just went to, did you see that notice today? I think it went to be finalized. So I think we're lining up well with it. We've agreed on assumptions in order to run the methodology. We have consultants and city staff met to analyze the initial round of buildable lands and further refine those findings. We've looked at the analysis of land use in critical areas. We've considered additional reduction factors, which I'll also get into in a little bit. And then we've calculated a capacity of households and jobs based on these initial assumptions. So again, like I said, the numbers you're going to see tonight and the findings are a result of a group of assumptions we had to make through this process. So just highlighting some of the baseline report findings. So Cheney's population is generally younger than county, state, and national averages. I think we know why, because of Eastern. But this presents an opportunity to cater to the housing needs of younger residents and first-time home buyers. So what is having a younger community mean here? And what does that mean for housing? The city also performs well in educational attainment, obviously, again, probably due to Eastern's presence, and then also a high percentage of residents with bachelor's and graduate degrees compared to the average. Race and ethnicity also play a significant role in housing disparities. So looking at home ownership rates among different racial and ethnic groups, there was some disparities there as well. And all of this information is included in the baseline report, so we can get more into these details. But again, tonight's kind of about 30,000 foot level. So I welcome questions on this, but we can always get into it more later as well. So looking at today, Cheney's median household income is lower than the county, state, and national averages, with housing expenses forming a significant portion of monthly budgets. So looking at housing is a very burdensome cost for a lot of people in the community. Various factors that affect housing are discussed in this report and emphasize the need to address housing affordability and support vulnerable populations in the community. Well, also regarding housing trends, Cheney has a higher proportion of renter occupied units compared to owner occupied units. And I think that's been a big finding here. We can see kind of a visual of that on the lower chart here. Cheney's, and it's hard to see Cheney on the left here compared to Spokane County, Washington, and the US. So only a third of households are owner occupied compared to essentially flip that for county, state, and US trends. Sure. Yeah, no, you can.
I was just gonna say, I'm hearing that that trend is changing, but in other jurisdictions and the county proper. There are an increasing number of apartments, townhouses, and things that people are in other jurisdictions too, or is it, and just it's not as dramatic as ours, or is that not?
So your question is that trending that way in other communities?
Rentals and so on in other jurisdictions also, is it?
Right.
Shifting?
I'm gonna shift that over to Brian or Madeline with Points Consulting. Do you have any insight on that?
I can hear Aaron pretty well, but I couldn't hear the council member. Can you repeat the question, please?
Yeah. Oh, so she just asked if there are other communities that trend towards kind of a higher rate of rentals. If that's a trend happening in other communities.
Generally, no. I'd say generally no, but in communities that have colleges, yes. So that's the unique feature that makes that the case here.
That is an important question. I think it's impacts your housing landscape. See that I hit everything on the slide. Housing values are increasing, home values have also appreciated, and affordability remains a concern. So kind of nothing too surprising there, but definitely emphasizes the need for looking at housing. Your population forecast. So this was done just through a kind of a straight line projection using your current percentage of the county's population. OFM, which is a state agency, they put out new forecasts every 5 years. So their most recent forecast came out in just last year in 2022. And so they forecasted out through 2050, the population of Spokane County. And we just took, okay, what's Cheney's share of the county population today and projected that out. So with that assumption, you're looking at a 19% increase to a population of just over 15,000, a little over 20 years from now. So there's obviously a lot of other ways to do that, but I think even at the county, that's the direction they're going with their recommendation for how to project out communities' populations. So that's significant growth, not crazy. It's not out of control, but it definitely makes you think, how are we going to accommodate that population? So looking at housing in relation to that, so the Department of Commerce put out a tool just earlier this year called the Housing for All Planning Tool, and also known as the HAPT. And that is essentially a plug-in Excel sheet that so we plugged in our population forecast, and it spits out a number for different levels of affordability or different. So these numbers across the top are percentage of annual or area median income, AMI, and it puts in categories of how much housing you need for the lowest income population, median, up to over 120% of AMI. So approximately 2/3 of the new units that this tool predicted. So I should also say that this is the tool that Commerce is saying is kind of saying you need to use. So we're using this as saying, okay, this is the projection for the amount of housing we need by 2045. 1,724 new units in addition to what we have today. 2/3 of those new units need to serve individuals with incomes at or below 80% of the area median income. So that's pretty significant, showing that a majority of housing needs to be for low medium income populations. Again, this highlights the need for middle housing. So middle housing is the term we're using for providing options between single family homes and large apartments. So these are your townhomes, your duplexes, triplexes, mixed use, so apartments above retail, all those kinds. And you can see Commerce has provided this chart below that essentially aligns these categories of AMI with types of housing. So essentially you're needing a lot of the multifamily housing is kind of what it's saying. So not as much single family, more middle housing. Following this general best practice. So how this relates to buildable lands analysis is that, and this graphic here is provided by the Department of Commerce. So we, again, like I said, we use Spokane County's methodology in coordination with regional efforts to look at this. We're I believe the first one's doing this in the county for this cycle of comp plan update. A lot of times people will do that along with their comp plan update. But this is going to be helpful for you guys. You're going to already have this out of the way. So the goal is to determine how much land within the city limits and UGA and the capacity of that land to hold housing and jobs. So essentially the process is looking at how much, so the comprehensive plan, what your land use says. So that's where we kind of, what we used as the basis. So your future land use map that's part of your comprehensive plan designates areas of the city that are intended for residential, commercial, mixed use as a future use. So that was kind of the basis that we started with here. Then building on that, looking at criteria for this vacant, underutilized, and partially utilized land, and deducting that from the total amount of land in the city, saying those are the parcels that are buildable. So vacant, obviously you can build new development on. Underutilized means that essentially there's lower barriers towards redevelopment. So saying this land as it stands is not of high value compared to the land underneath it, and therefore could provide value for a developer to redevelop it. Partially utilized is saying you have a large piece of land and only, a small corner of it is used. So there are some calculations and best practices that inform what those pieces of land look like. For vacant land, it's parcels with an improvement value of $5,000 or lower as defined by the county assessor. So that was a new update with Spokane County methodology this year. They upped that from $500, essentially just saying if $5,000 improvement value on the land or lower is essentially vacant. Underutilized is where the improvement value of the land is low when compared to the land value. And that's, I think we went with 4 times the amount. Or it was 2 times the amount on residential land. So if the improvement on the land was 2 times the land value or less, then it was considered underutilized in residential areas. In commercial areas, it was 4 times if the improvement value is 4 times the land. Happy to explain that all later, but again, I don't want to get into the weeds tonight too much. Partially utilized land is where a significant amount of land, so it can be subdivided potentially. Non-buildable land, so you find out where all your buildable land is. Then you take your critical areas, which in Cheney are wetlands, your wetland buffers, the 100-year floodplain, and we looked at steep slopes too. So then you map all that, subtract all that land out. And then you have different, then you take what's left over, apply a reduction factor, and then you look at maximum densities. So reduction factor is right here. So our reduction factor was 65% total. That's because we took out 25% for development of roads and public right-of-way, 15% for public facilities, so those things like open space, parks, stormwater, all your kind of basic public utility and facility uses. And then you always have a general market factor in these analyses. And that accounts for things like people not wanting to sell their land to redevelop. It's just kind of a market factor. So we went with the middle road on all of these numbers. They were kind of just took the middle, so 25%. Typically we see land quantity analysis use 20 to 30%, for example. So that's how we got to that 65%. So it's a significant amount that you end up reducing, but all for a good reason. We then look at the land use type and the general density per acre of each of those land uses. So some of those have to be assumed because they're not defined in the comp plan, but some are clearly defined in the comp plan. And then an employment density is also used to calculate the employment capacity in different zones. And those are all taken from best practices, which if you have more questions on that, Points Consulting can also help answer questions there. So we consolidated all this zoning and land use within each parcel in Cheney. And this was already the case for a large majority of parcels. I think that means that so our net acres overall is the developable acres, subtracting the critical areas, minus the right-of-way deduction, public facilities deduction, and the market factor deduction. This is all the boring stuff, and I promise we're done now. So the findings of all of this, and the reason I shared that with you is just so you can see these are the assumptions that we have to make. It's not an exact science. It doesn't have an exact number. And we can justify those numbers however the community kind of wants to justify them. So we're just looking at best practices and general trends in other communities. The preliminary findings show population, obviously, of 15,379 for 2045, what we discussed. That's essentially 2,500 more residents than today. This projected growth in just population will take up 62% of the remaining residential capacity within the city limits and UGA. So that's a significant percent because it's only a 19% increase in your population, but it uses almost 2/3 of your buildable land for residential purposes. If you look at just the UGA, and I have maps, if we can look at maps of any of these too later on. If you look at just the UGA, it can only accommodate 241 people. That's equivalent to 1 year's worth of population growth and could make a strong case for a change to your UGA because, again, the point of a UGA is this is where your growth can happen in the future. You guys don't have a lot of opportunity for that in your current UGA. Can be a point of discussion in a little bit. For our employment capacity, existing jobs in Cheney as of this year, 4,266. Looking at employees per acre capacity for employment-based land. So these are commercial, industrial, mixed-use lands. There's a capacity for 1,400 more jobs. That's a 33% increase from today. over half of these jobs would be accommodated by the industrial zone. So that's one thing to consider. How much of different types of jobs do you want to bring to Cheney? And here's just some more assumptions about the density, but again, if we look at just the urban growth area for employment, it's about 2% of the total jobs in Cheney that the urban growth area can accommodate. So it's not just residential that growth is limited in the UGA, it's also employment. Because the average growth rate in Cheney between 2010 and 2021 is 2.1%. So again, same with population, the UGA can accommodate about 1 year's worth of growth in jobs. If you're to look at just accommodating that in the UGA. So again, it makes a strong case that the UGA might not be well utilized. Our data refinement on this continues. Like I said, there's kind of a lot of different tweaks and stuff we can do. For example, we can kind of adjust what our zoning capacity says. Like I said, we have made some assumptions from the comp plan, but you know, if there is a desire to have higher densities in certain zones, these assumptions could potentially change. Again, that would have to be a kind of informed by the comp plan, but there is some flexibility there. Looking at areas of buildable lands to determine if they should be reasonably included. So I can show you a map, but if you look at the buildable land analysis for the UGA, for example, it's all of the wetlands and wetland buffers, and they just kind of make this bubbly hodgepodge of the buildable lands. So is it actually reasonable to say that this tiny piece of land is buildable if it's completely surrounded by non-buildable land? How are you going to develop a subdivision out there or roads or anything? There'd be a lot of mitigation work. And then also looking at how to consider how Eastern fits into the picture. We didn't really consider in this initial analysis housing on Eastern's campus. And that's because we kind of want to treat it like a isolated thing and say Eastern's kind of a special case. So we're going to have that in the report. We haven't got to that part of it yet, but we're working with Eastern's housing department to see what they forecast, how much they think they can accommodate in housing on campus versus off campus. And
But as the city goes through their comp plan process, definitely gonna partner with Eastern, because they're going through a strategic plan as well.
yes,
So it makes sense that we work together through this, you know.
For sure. Yeah, and so that's the tough thing is they don't have an updated strategic plan. I think the last one's 2014 or something. So a lot's changed since then for Eastern. And so because they don't know that, there's a lot that we don't know to put into this report, but can be coordinated with the comp. So that's kind of my general overview of the findings to this point in this report. So I'd like to open it up to questions, and then I have some discussion points, and however we want to. It's kind of an open discussion at this point, but I've got some leading questions if we want to start there. There are a few options. So there's an option to look at changing your land use densities. You can grow in and up. So infill, increasing, densities within the city is one option. Or you can apply to the county for a UGA amendment. So that's essentially the underutilized layer could be a proxy for that. So yes, we looked at all the parcels within the city. So we have a map of here's the vacant parcels, here's the underutilized parcels. So you could do a more in-depth look at those for infill potential. If you increase, and that's why I was saying, so if you change your assumptions for density, the numbers could start looking different on those infill parcels. They could accommodate more people and jobs. So like individual parcels, how much they could accommodate?
Correct.
Yeah,
You know, as I drive around the city, and I've lived here basically since '72.
Yeah.
And as I drive around, yeah, I see some areas, but I don't see a whole. All I see is up,
yeah,
and we on the planning commission have been facing the wrath of Cheney by allowing more and more and more apartments to go up. People would prefer, you know, that they stay, you know, lower versus. Do we have an analysis of difference between putting in apartments versus putting in duplexes or triplexes or that kind of thing?
I don't think we've looked at that specifically. There's, I think we could align assumptions for types of housing with densities. So if you're saying you can accommodate 25 people per acre in your mixed use zone, which is one of the assumptions we used, that sounds more like an apartment than townhouses. But so you could kind of equate that, say, generally this type of housing would go with this type of density, but there's really no way to predict exactly what types of housing are going to go in if you allow a certain type of density. It all depends on what you allow in your zoning. I don't know if that really answered your question, but I'm just.
That's okay. I'm just asking you, have you looked at that? Because when we look at it, we have to figure out, you know, what we can do with the city versus step two, which is going to the county and changing the UGA, which everybody's known in the city, the council and the planning commission for years, that the UGA is absolutely worthless at this point.
Sure.
You know, so we need to be able to plan.
Mhm.
So I'm looking at the kind of plan to do that. And to get to the number of new people, the 2,400 that we are supposedly going to have by 2040.
I interject something on that. Aaron,
Yeah, go for it, Brian.
hear me? Okay. I was messing around with my Bluetooth, but I think I caught the majority of that question. If something's going to be brought fresh into the UGA, it seems to me that that's a pretty fresh opportunity to declare what the land use is for that new addition. So all you have to keep in mind there is what's suitable based on surrounding land uses and transportation factors and things like that. So if there are concerns from the community that there's too much multifamily, well, in addition to the UGA, could either be multifamily or single family or mixed use, depending on the location where it goes. So it could actually be a tool to help with some of that concern.
So I think it's kind of a question that you guys have to answer through the comp plan process, is what kinds of housing are we going to allow in certain areas of the city? So it's not really something that we can calculate exactly. It kind of has to be a policy direction that you choose.
The projected numbers are more along the lines that we were to accommodate that growth based off of the decisions we make, or if we're able to. That growth. Obviously, the numbers that are actually reached, we don't have much sense. We wouldn't have housing for them, but we have to see somewhere else.
Mhm. Right, yeah, so it assumes the current land use that you have designated. So it says you can accommodate, so essentially what the finding said is you can accommodate your growth through 2045. You can accommodate, it would use 62% of your residential land. Do you want to be that strapped at that point for residential land? Or do we want to look sooner at how we can grow beyond 2045? So it's saying we can grow, we can accommodate that growth with the current land use. So
And
it is possible.
And the current zoning as is.
That's my question.
Yeah,
Have we looked at the current zoning and areas that maybe we could tweak zoning or change to accommodate this growth?
right. So that's a part of the recommendations that will come out of this, is saying, and I think a lot of that is probably going to have to come in the comp plan, because a lot of that has to be informed by the community, and this project doesn't have a lot of community involvement other than right now. So this will probably make some general recommendations about the direction and provide some support for what you take to the public during your comp plan process. But yeah. So, and we did look at zoning and land use as well. And looking towards the future, the land use seemed more appropriate, because it represents the potential for the land versus what it's zoned now, if that makes sense.
What I understand you saying is that we currently, within the city, within the UGA, we currently have enough space available to accommodate all the growth that is expected by 2045. But the only way we can do that is to change our zoning to allow for more density per acre.
Up to what your future land use map currently says. So, for example, if something is zoned for single family, but it's within a mixed use designated on your future land use map, that could be rezoned to mixed use by your future land use map supporting it and your comp plan supporting it. Obviously, those rezones have to go through this group, but it allows for that potential. So it looks at, it's saying if you use the highest potential of the land with the future land use map, you can accommodate it. With the zoning, I could calculate those numbers. I didn't, because I had assumed that future land use was it's the potential, but we could always look at that.
Your earlier slides, you mentioned that by 2045, we're looking for 1,724 new units.
Yes.
How are you accounting for development that's basically a very flat process? That's a big parcel right now. Maybe like local rezone and plan. Say upwards of 400.
Right.
How is that accounted for in? And then,
Well, so that number is strictly spit out from the commerce tool. So it just says this is the number that you need. And if you're saying, okay, well, we can accommodate 400 units in this new area, then that's, 400 towards that number. It doesn't necessarily matter how you get there.
did part of your analysis, did you look at everything that's either currently under preliminary plat, recently final platted, that's vacant land, or that's already just sitting there as a
Right.
parcel.
Right, so that was the process. I sat down, I printed out some big maps and sat down with Brett and Todd. And they informed me of, okay, this area is essentially already platted in the development process. And so we took those out of the buildable lands.
Out of the buildable land?
Well, because we were saying that they're already, essentially already built because they're under process. So you're not gonna be able to accommodate more land there or more,
It's already approved, so
Yes.
it's kind of a done deal.
Spoken for.
yes.
But the people aren't there though.
Changes the number significantly. But I guess, let me back up. So if in 2045, we're looking for roughly 7
Mhm.
on the market right now. Again, we'll just use the one by Bymar. I think the number is 400 if I'm lost. If those 400 units are applied, that number goes down
Mhm.
by 5% roughly.
Yep.
And that's,
That's not plotted or anything, so that wouldn't be in the, take it out of the factor. is it? It would be- it
I
would
don't know.
be
That's what
things
I'm
like-
asking.
Well, so we didn't look at, this is merely capacity. So this is how much capacity and how much you need to accommodate and can accommodate. So we didn't get to the specifics of looking at how many units are currently in development and things like that. We just kind of made the assumption that these are spoken for.
If a property is
So there-
zoned R3, you expect this many
Yes.
people.
Yeah. Yeah.
Per person.
Yes.
But if there's no units there, we're not counting those 2 or 17.
Well, if you build, so it depends on where, it depends on what we did in our process. And I don't remember if we got that in that. Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, I mean, the process been realize that we made a change from commercial to multifamily. And so the task was to see how much vacant land as we see the comprehensive plan, what that use could be. We don't know, if that continues that use, or when we go up to, do the comprehensive plan, whether those zones change a little bit to accommodate those growth. But took a look at the R1s, took a look at the R3s that are currently vacant. Also, some of the ones that are buildable or underutilized within those zones. I also asked them to take a look at, do we have too much commercial area? Do we have too much industrial? Those are things we need to have discussion with in the future, because we do have some land that lays vacant that's both industrial and commercial use. Then we took a look at the mixed use, because we can actually put density into some kind of commercial and mixed use. So as we take a look at that, that's how we develop that plan within the city limits as we see it right now. Part of that process is also on the UGA itself. We took a look at the amount of land we have. Now, everybody knows what the UGA is, and most of that land out there is pretty much the wastewater treatment plant, wetlands, and then the surrounding areas. So just taking a look at how that land would develop in the UGA, same principle in the city limits, gives us that vacant space as we see it today, but there also is potential for a comprehensive plan update, to take a look at all those different zones and try to fit it in. We're not recommending this as, hey, we're gonna come in and say, you got, let's take this industrial, commercial, or change this R1 to an R3. We're not suggesting that right now. We're just trying to give you the data for the informed decision as we move forward with the comprehensive plan. That kind of sets the stage.
But I appreciate that, Todd. Again, in my mind, again, I'll just use the Bymar property. If that is slated for eventually being R3 and 400 units, we have to take it off the table, because it's,
I don't think it's 400. I did a rough calculation. I think even with the max density and taking that out, I think we planned for around 200, but 284, that's just an example of where commercial was changed into an R3, taking a look at all those areas as well.
So am I understanding this correctly? You only looked at, or you accounted for the things that are already in the planning process of being developed, not future development, but things that are already have started the ball rolling.
Yeah, so as informed by city staff, these are things that the things are happening there. So it's not, and that property is the property you're talking about on this map. Yeah. I was just gonna see, so this is the buildable acres for residential land. So it's kind of this not great color, but so yeah, we don't see it in our buildable land capacity here. Yes, yes. And again, we're not, I think it's not. I mean, if there's big red flags with, these maps in here, let us know. But, I don't think we're trying to get to the point of like, oh, well, that individual property, is actually not buildable and things like that. This is kind of looking at these general principles of what's buildable and not. This is how much approximate land. So it's an approximation for you guys to make an informed decision on land use changes and policies.
But that is capacity though. I don't
Yes.
understand. That is capacity in the city of Cheney for R3 and mixed use. That 18 acres. Right?
That was subdivided, that was only the back half, I think that was right around 10 or 11, again, the front slide, your 17, somewhere around there. But then when you take out, you're right, it may not have shown up in that area, because it was probably considered mini creek and more of a wetland issue.
But so this is like the point, like, for big properties like that, we can add that back in or, add it back in. But again, these are,
I think
we
need to
didn't
look
go
at
through
all-
part.
I think we need to look at all the land because we're talking 20 years plus. Everything in the city limits that has potential for capacity, right? Whether it's platted or not, if I've got a 3-acre piece of land that there's nothing on, but it's zoned R3, there's potential there to house X number of people over the next 20 years, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yes.
And that's why I was asking if that was all taken into consideration to support the future growth of the city.
Yes. Yes. So that was the
thought.
I don't want to.
No, I was just wondering.
Purpose of the meeting is at a 30,000-foot elevation. We understand that we may have identified some areas, and we're not trying to calculate everything tonight.
Yeah.
We're just trying to say that within the city limits, as we plan for the comprehensive plan, we do have capacity within the city limits, and we want to identify those. So if somebody comes in with an application for a UGA extension, this is the tools you need to make that decision whether you want to bring it in or not. It's also a decision if, when we go to the comprehensive plan and possibly make a UGA recommendation or anything, this is the tools that we need to develop those policies and decisions.
Support our
based on.
Got it.
So yeah, I think the goal is not looking at the individual parcels, but it's looking at general trends to support. Do we want to look at UGA amendments? Do we want to look at allowing for greater densities within the city? So those are the kinds of things that I think this group would benefit from discussing. So I think with that, we can look at the question, where do you want to be 20 years from now? Do we want to grow denser up or or even like, I can pull up some maps too. Cause I think you can see. Some things here. But any initial thoughts on that kind of 20 years from now? Is it Cheney looking pretty much the same? Is it? Mhm.
Fluctuated, but you know, thousands in the next 20 years.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yes. So that's why we're going to look at that as kind of a separate thing because it's a pretty big impact. You know, if enrollment's gonna go up a lot, then you need to look at how you're gonna accommodate that on and off campus and off campus. So when we talked with them, their assumption for now is that, and Brett, you can chime in if there's anything I'm missing, but they're essentially looking at kind of leveling out in the long term. They're looking at trends for generations and amount and percentages of people that are going to college, and essentially they expect to kind of plateau within the next few years, lower than where they had been, but do you remember the number? Yeah, that sounds right to me too. So they wanted to right size their number of beds on campus to 1,500. I think there's 2,300 capacity now, but they're planning on getting rid of a couple dorms and building a couple new ones, and essentially leveling out at about 1,300 to 1,500 beds provided on campus. So that's their long-term plan right now. So they don't see, you know, a big explosion in the number of enrollment. So, yeah. So I think another big thing to consider is looking at the area south. So it's your UGA, but also the area south of the railroad tracks, and talking about development potential in that area. And if there's, because if put on the railroad and the roads, I'll bring up the critical areas. Critical areas combined. So just taking a look at that map there, and if I can change I don't know if I can change the color, fortunately, on this version, but you can kind of see the mess on the south side of town there. Those are all critical areas combined: wetlands, buffers, floodplains, steep slopes. Looks pretty tough to develop in general. Get the UGA. But so any thoughts on that? I know that, you know, I've talked with city staff about ability to serve, you know, have emergency services in that area. If you're having to get an ambulance over there but there's a train crossing, it's more difficult. So are these things that seem like barriers to this group? Are they things that impact? Yeah.
And we can't take care of it if we got to wait for a train across the flat in 10 minutes. That amount of time is like, yeah.
Right.
I don't know how. I don't know how we. Property down there.
Mhm. Right.
And that was the whole crux behind the legislation a couple years ago, to allow for land swaps, the UGA. Is to, I'll just say, right sort of past decisions that maybe aren't the best interest of the future. And this is exactly one of those. That land down there is gonna be very hard for us to serve. With the railroad, just the wetlands down there. I mean, I can't see how it pencils out. We put in roads and infrastructure and things down. For a few little spots, kind of working around the wetland, we just simply can't build it. I mean, and that was the whole point the legislature took up was, hey, let's build the right direction. Let's follow patterns of growth within a community. And, we're not seeing, a lot of growth in the south. We're seeing the growth, up north, northern part of town. So, that we were really excited. We participated quite a bit in, providing testimony and things of how this could really help Cheney, being able to swap some of this land, from an area that we're not going to an area at all.
Additionally, there's just so many, I'm just embarrassed to have been involved in that decision. That's just the worst decision that I can think of that we made. But, the story's changed.
We just need to write.
We need to write it. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I mean, as I looked at this, I'm thinking, we need to. Swap it for something else where we can actually have. It's single family, without creating that density. But it's also very frustrating. You're trying to in inclement weather. And so I think we need to look at the big picture of saying, how do we provide this wide variety of housing for a lot of different people? Whether they're low income, median income, or high income, how do we provide that? Because we all know, right now it's very difficult with the way that for, low income or even medium income to be able to afford, a place where they have their own green space that they can have their kids play in and feel like that they're safe. And the only way I see that happening is we need to change the UGA. That's why I ask you, what's our first step? Cause I
Yeah.
wanna see if you're gonna say that. That's,
Well, that's, I mean, and so that's typically something that you would do during your comp plan update. You're not the only community, even that I've worked with, that wants to change their EGA. It's not an easy process. But yeah. So it's, you know, there's, especially with Spokane County, I think there's some even more restrictions than some other counties. Or at least you can't do it till 25 or something like that. But
I think the other thing, or one of the things that we struggle with that we may not be able to control in any way, but is that, just a handful of people own these spaces and they don't move on them. We're stuck. And so somehow we have to provide opportunities, encourage whatever to
yeah.
get a diverse choice of builders available in the community. Because as we know, we've got a couple things that people just sit on them. And stop. Their wins.
And I think so that's the case with your current UGA. Is it one property owner or handful?
Yeah, there are a couple of are slow to move. You know, there's some other
Yeah,
places in town where there's slow.
right.
But you know, it's their finances too, so
Sure,
I'm really
yeah.
being super critical.
No, yeah.
It's their money, not mine.
But it is a barrier if your whole UGA is in the hands of one property.
I'm not sure if you can write rules that say, you know, if you say you're going to do this, you have X number of years to do it. And if not, then you're out. You know, just, I mean, I'm just
Yeah,
not sure if that's
yeah,
possible.
yeah. I know. I think UGAs are probably treated a little more permanently than that, but yeah. Yes. No, I think it's a good thing to have these ideas and talk with Commerce about what the needs are, because they're often open to ideas, but also present more barriers sometimes too. So it's that open dialogue throughout. And Brett and I and Todd are going to meet with Commerce rep next week, or it might be this week, to talk about initial findings, takeaways from tonight, and kind of talk about what potential options are. I just wanted to bring attention to this map too. So this shows a little bit wider view of the city and its surroundings, with basically just critical areas showing. So the blue is all the wetlands, floodplains, slopes. You've got the purple, which is the Turnbull. So you can see just the current area in the UGA, and even this area within the city south of the tracks has a lot of restriction. If you want to look at potential UGA changes, there are some areas that look upon initial glance as more feasible. I don't think we're going to get to the point of drawing a map for you from this, but I think making recommendations that say general areas that you could propose UGA swap are open to put in this report. So does anything strike you from this map here about which areas, which ways, you know, north along 904 or west? Or I think we also have what is not on this map. There's ag lands, and there might be some restrictions with that, but I think those are more surmountable to get by than critical areas. So and I think especially if you're making the case that our current UGA is essentially undevelopable, what's our other option?
Prior to like a UGA amendment or swap, would we need to have buy-in from landowners? Like they would need to essentially agree to be included in the UGA because we'd be counting on them to develop it. And if they're like, no, I mean, is that part of the process of vetting?
Yes.
Property owners, and does the map then get, it's not a big chunk of land, it's
Right.
actually, I don't know.
Yeah, so I think, I think it's just best practice to involve them anyway. But you know, during your comp plan process, if that's when you're looking to do this, that would be, you want to make sure that those people are on, you know, part of your stakeholder group or on your steering committees, get a sense of buy-in and willingness from them. What are they willing to do? I worked with the city of Ephrata this last year, and they wanted to propose a UGA amendment to Grant County, and their UGA amendment was taking land away from a recreational hillside that is used as biking and hiking and things like that is never going to develop. So again, it was one of those points, why was this ever in the UGA to begin with, and put it towards an area where they're going to develop more public facilities and things like that. So it's not that they're looking to develop necessarily more housing in their UGA, whereas Cheney might essentially want to do that. But it did just bring up that point of, okay, well, we can't really draw the line for the new UGA around other areas because I think they've tried to include other people before, and this new UGA amendment was going to essentially make a donut. So they're going to have a hole in the middle of their city that's not in the UGA. And that's just because of unwilling landowners. So it does have an impact.
Todd, go ahead. You know, as I listen to this conversation, you understand, and there's a good point, whether owners a UGA or not, typically somebody wants to be in the UGA, somebody doesn't want to be in the, even though they're in the UGA, that doesn't make them automatically that they will become a city. They have to apply, they want to apply. Or they want our utilities through a latecomers agreement where if they are in the UGA, we can bring them into the city. And it's also within the city limits itself. We may not have property owners that want to do it. So it's not really that the city or the government telling them what we can do. We're just trying to plan for growth with willing people to develop. So I get that answer.
This is map I'll share real quick. So this is housing capacity by census block. So this is looking at individual census blocks to try to kind of provide more of a heat map of where housing capacity could happen. So not just looking at the pure acres, but this is the number of housing units in a census block that could be accommodated. This one looks very much like you can build in the UGA, but that's because if you look at a map like this, it's aggregating all of these little bits in between the critical areas and saying that's all buildable land. So we could build, we have a lot of acres to work with. But again, that's a consideration to say, even though the analysis says we have so many buildable acres in the UGA, it might actually realistically be a lot less than that. So.
That takes us back to the problem we sell the tracks.
Yes. Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I'm kind of getting a sense generally from the group that there's a strong interest in UGA, a change to the UGA, moving that, at least this area, big area south of the tracks, and trying to swap that with somewhere north or west, somewhere kind of in that more buildable space outside the city.
Available.
Right. But if you have a recommendation starting, from this report, you can carry on through the comp plan process. You can justify a lot of those, why we're looking into this and, talking with those landowners and saying, okay, here, look, we can't do a lot here. So we're looking at options and, there could be an incentive for some people to, or an interest to join the UGA.
26.
I think you can start, or at least funding starts for it next year for you guys, so.
There would not any sense of, one never knows what's actually gonna happen with the legislature, but do we have any sense that there's going to be a sort of furthering of density, relaxing of rules and sort of encouraging density?
I mean, I wouldn't be surprised. I don't know if Points Consulting has anything to add to it, but again, Cheney doesn't apply to a lot of the legislation that came from this year because you're not contiguous with the Spokane city limits. But I could see, I think that they're going that direction. It seems like they build on it every year, so I wouldn't be surprised.
The trends I read, and I don't study urbanism actively daily, but one of the trends that I seem to see when I do read articles and so on, is that sixplexes can save the world.
I think that, so to me, that goes back to the middle housing, need for middle housing. So that's saying, okay, well, sixplex, is that an apartment or not? It's not a giant apartment complex. It's something in the middle. It's saying it's not as expensive as owning your own single family home or even a townhome or something like that. It's more of those middle ground options that are more affordable, but provide options for people that may not want to live in a big apartment complex or something like that. Someone have something to say?
Can I add to that?
Go ahead, Brian.
Can I add to that, Aaron? Yeah. Again, so I'm getting fragments of the conversation, but I think I get the general theme. When you talk to people who are builders and developers, they will often tell you that it's very difficult to build middle density because there's not enough scale for them to make money. And I think that is true of the type of people who are building, 20, 50, 100 units at the same time. But this is the challenge of middle density, is that it's not designed to be the same type of housing as those really high density units, and it's also not designed to be really low density. You can make money on low density, you can make money on high density. Middle density is still a little tricky. The people who tend to be successful at it are people who are in the community, who own the land, who have a lender that understands what they're trying to do, who understand the market. All those kind of dynamics need to merge together. So you can't force it, but what you can do is zone to allow it and then let the market respond to it. And honestly, in most places that takes a few years. The action trails the policy on that front.
I think to add to that, I think we will see more incentive options coming. I know, Department of Commerce funding, providing a lot of funding for development of middle housing, tax incentives, things like that, that make these middle housing options more feasible for developers. So, yeah.
So we finish our comp. We're essentially applying for programs for asking. if they say, hey, yeah, you guys are doing everything you need, we agree with what you want to do, is there someone within the county that then helps us in that process, or is it still, we're on our own and we just have to prove to them that we did our homework and knew what we're talking about?
So I think working with them from the start and, having them in conversations during your comp plan update is gonna be important. So I think they, should be a stakeholder or on an advisory committee or something like that. I think that if you come to them with a strong proposal, they will work with you. I haven't gone through that process myself before. Again, like I said, people are interested in it, but I think it's a difficult thing to do outside of a comp plan periodic update process. So, I don't know if you have any more insight on that, but the county would be willing to work with the city.
You guys will remember your, this UGA adjust, but we also have to be not only partners who want to commit to the UGA, we also have to work with somebody who can pull out of the UGA.
Right.
As well, so we have to have that kind of conversation on both sides of the, budget.
Yes. So I think it's an important thing to start conversations early on. I think even getting Commerce's attention about this now and saying there's an interest, because I think they it's the county that has the ultimate say, but it's Commerce that administers the Growth Management Act. So they're consulted for, rules about UGA changes and provide guidance and things like that. So I think getting the county, city, and Commerce in the same room to talk about this stuff, as well as obviously property owners, is going to be important to do early on. And I think that's probably a.
So if we want to dump this out at the UGA, we have to have the permission of all the landowners down there to do that.
We have to have a discussion, I don't know if we have to have a position, but we have to have a discussion. Because.
Well, I just think that makes sense to have the discussion, but I hate to be held over the barrel, by getting one person who owns a major portion of the land that, would basically prevent us from making that adjustment. Yeah, I don't think they do that, but we really need to be able to make sure that we're having those conversations to make sure we have everybody at the table discussing it. And if we do that, what I hear you saying is that the chances are better. No guarantees, because there's always no guarantees when you're working with big government. But it is complicated to the table and have to start having that discussion versus we really need to move forward on costing changes.
So that, and the UGA is county land, so it's not up to the property owner whether I think the county would highly consider what the property owner thinks. They might not listen to them if, the city's making a good, I don't know, there's a lot of the unknowns there, but it's the county that has the ultimate say in the UGA. Any other thoughts coming up from people through this conversation? I have a lot of maps. I won't go through all of them right now. Just kind of thinking about opportunities for the future. So is this group tracking things that, and this goes back to kind of what Cheney wants to be 20 years from now. Because we can look at that straight line projection of population forecast, but there's a lot of assumptions and efforts that Cheney could make to change that. Say we want to grow more, or we want to restrict growth. We want to attract big employers and things like that. You know, are we kind of looking, as the group, feel this group more kind of status quo? Cheney is doing good, other than, you know, UGA kind of natural growth stuff. You know, are there any big changes that this group wants to see or has a pulse on or anything like that for the future? Okay. Right.
In between the trains.
Yeah, in between the.
You get used to that, but
For sure.
you know, I think that's what we're looking at, and certainly we need to attract. We talked about that, and I think the city has really been trying to do, you know, whatever they can. That in, but I think a lot of that is you gotta have the people before the businesses are gonna come.
Right.
It's not like, you know, we've gotta have that provided to them so that it's a place that, you know, people want to come to. That's why I was at that 20+ years ago. You know, in high school, football and Easter, you know, that's why I moved back out.
Mhm.
And we got the opportunities to, you know, I love the fact that we can be smart. Just, you know, I was just an athlete, you know, you weren't in choir, or if you're just an athlete, you weren't in drama. You know, that's what I think we provide here. And that's why.
Right. Do you think that it's is it a perception that I'm looking at what's the barrier to that happening? Is it what you think the perception of Cheney is to someone looking to move, or is it the actual ability for someone to, the availability of housing and affordability and things like that? Or is it, or combination?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Exactly what it is the ability to be able to find, you know, a place.
Mhm.
Low, medium, you know, and, you know, the higher income, you know, to make it that way. A lot of investment money. person that, you know. I think that we need to do a little bit better.
Right. Can't sell what you don't have.
When I interviewed at Eastern, I was driven to South Hill and told that this is where the faculty lives.
Uh-huh.
And I said, I beg to differ.
I think there's also like, joke with my friends about it's 15 miles from Cheney to Spokane, but it's 55 miles. from Cheney.
Oh my gosh,
You know,
seriously.
there's just this idea that
Good perception.
Right.
Yeah,
we're just,
like, we're okay commuting into Spokane, but nobody wants to come from Spokane to here, and they feel like it's so far out there, and
and it
it's just.
gets reinforced by our county
Mhm.
when you go to presentations and they're displaying something on a map. Genie's generally cut off. I mean, it doesn't, Genie
Right.
doesn't even show up.
People
on
don't
the-
even remember that
on
we're
the
part of
map.
county.
I don't think you've ever seen those.
Yeah.
It's stuff with me.
Yeah.
And, so anyway, I think there's a little, of that, but public transportation runs so regularly here.
Mhm.
We are so well served. Additionally, you know, there's lots of people go back and forth to town to work. You can always get back and forth with, you know, carpooling and so on. So there's plenty of opportunity. Transportation issues resolved, but anyway, I think that there's an impediment there for people they don't really understand, and then also a lot of kids who might have come to school at Eastern think of maybe, you know, school, Cheney is kind of, oh, don't they don't want to go back, they want to go somewhere bigger now, or you know, more exciting things. And they do, as they get older, decide to come back, but I don't know, there's just this, it's an odd mindset.
So one of my next questions was going to be about, because I'm hearing, you know, kind of the perception within the region of Cheney. And, you know, the perception not just of the city, but of the accessibility of the rest of the region and Cheney. You mentioned there's great transit. This is a map of the high performance transit line, the 6, the stops there. And then this is, I believe, so it's 250 feet and 500 feet walking distance between those. So if you're looking at, you know, okay, I was just going to throw out kind of an option of, you could look at densification around transit nodes and say, if there are more housing opportunities around these transit nodes, you know, you're 1 minute away from a bus stop that takes you directly to Spokane and the University District and things like that. And really kind of, you know, advertising that Cheney is connected to the region. So that's another potential strategy you could look at, and kind of more on that infill side of things. And it's not like you have to choose just infill or just expansion. You can do both. But that's just kind of a option I was going to throw out there, that you do have good transit and that's an opportunity.
Lovely, Cheney, to work on philosophically a more walkable and like, and I know we have some of the best bike lanes identified than we have before it was popular and famous. But it would be nice if we somehow could encourage walkability and biking. Especially as you hear about, you know, the blue places where people live longer and so on.
Blue zones, yeah.
They're outside more, they walk places, they, you know, they're happier. You know, they're all of these things that sort of blend together, in terms of livability. So we slow those cars down.
Yeah, I mean,
We gotta do something about that Strode on First.
Pardon?
The Strode that is
Mhm.
First, beyond north of Yokes, like, it's just not a friendly place to walk. And it's way too fast, and I've seen people have close calls with vehicles because people aren't slowing down through there.
I think your comp plan as it is today does support things like that,
Yes.
but
Mhm.
you know, it all goes into, you know, what the code actually says and, you know, what you can enforce.
What you can-
Yeah.
What you can encourage and how you do that. what
Mhm.
programs you have and the whole-
What you require of new development to contribute toward a walkable community.
Sidewalks right adjacent to streets. I wish we still had
That buffer.
the parking strips, but, you know,
Mm.
again, it's money, it's.
Right, right, for sure. Yeah. So I'm gonna kind of let that lead since we're at 7:30 to what land use policies or strategies would you support? So I think we've talked about a lot of these already, but I'm just gonna kind of go through and see if any reactions, if you have any. So allowing higher densities within current city neighborhoods and infill development. Generally, is that supported after kind of what you hear tonight, or is it still more preferred?
When you start trying to increase densities, you're just looking at empty lots, empty businesses.
Mhm. Mhm. Right. Yes.
Meetings are when.
Yep.
And always. They don't want it. I don't mind showing up at 6 and staying until 10, so everybody gets a chance to say their piece, but it's mostly negative. They don't want more density. They want to be able to have a community that is walkable. That is friendly, where you have people that are out in their yard, doing whatever, instead of, we've got houses built up, right? Apartment complexes built up right to the line, very blue green space, so nobody can go out and stand there. You're not able to walk.
Mhm. Right. Kind of having that breathing room, the quality that makes living in a smaller town valuable. Yeah. Yes.
Pay our taxes. Because extend services and those services are gonna cost to maintain and pay, certainly the developers pay for the extension, but over time, the whole community pays for, those sorts of things, so.
Again, kind of. That also brings up a density question too, because the more higher density, the more, the less per person.
Middle housing would be a
structure
good
is.
compromise then for that. So in these areas, because you're right, like those are the meetings that we're here all night for, because everybody and their brother shows up to say they don't want that new development there.
Mhm.
How do we sell the middle housing to them then? Like, okay, well, instead of doing dense apartment complexes, let's do a row of townhouses. Or make sure that we have that buffer, that green space between them or whatever. There's gotta be some compromise looking at forward growth. Cause a lot of the people that show up, yeah, they've been living here for 30, 40 years. well, they're not gonna be living here for 40, 50 years longer. Like, we have to think about beyond that and what this place is gonna look like in 50 years.
So something like amending your development standards to look at, okay, if you're building something of higher density, you're also providing amenities, you're, set back from the sidewalk, you're providing green space or open space, or helping contribute toward a bike path or something like that, you're not just taking up room, as much room as possible, and cramming a bunch of people
what we
in,
heard.
you're providing quality.
Yeah, and that's one of the concerns that was brought up with one of our more recent developments that we talked about, was that there was no green space and they were trying to shove as many houses as they could into a space, and people were not amenable to that, so.
And the compatibility with the surrounding neighborhood.
Yeah, and the compatibility
Right,
with the surrounding
that's a big
neighborhood,
issue.
but it's like, okay, we've got areas that are mid-century homes, we've got areas that are historic homes, we've got areas that are modern.
Mhm.
Not always gonna mesh, but gotta be some way we can sell a little bit of housing at least.
Right, so I'm kind of hearing, because I'm hearing, we don't want the super dense development that we're, that has maybe happened here at some points where it, causes a big stir and things like that, but maybe looking at strategies where you can have infill at not super high densities,
Right, we put
and
like a
maybe in
quad,
strategic locations.
like a fourplex, and then at the end of a cul-de-sac, or, stuff like that, like where you have the mixed
Right,
density in some areas, where I do think we have some spots where we could infill, but maybe not putting in like a giant apartment complex there, but still accommodating more than a single family.
With that said, though, the competitiveness on nicer, higher end homes is still definitely there. I mean.
Yeah.
Yeah, fake Cheney, like,
Or
Yeah.
all the way to Spokane.
Mhm. Right,
Competition for everything. but
Right.
that's
I was
the-
gonna say, 'cause even the
Because,
lower.
yeah, they take up more real estate, more acreage, but they're also, another part of the community and asset to the town.
so it's single family and mixed residential of a certain level. We're not looking at just one or the other, we're looking at accommodating both, because we're seeing a need for both.
And I think when you have both, you have people that step up. They go from, the low income to the median income, to the higher income, and they've built, friendships and community here in this area, and so, they wanna, a lot of people wanna look, to the area that they have been, where all their friends are, and, where they become accustomed to knowing people. Not saying that's all generations that think that way, but we certainly need to provide opportunities for everybody to be able to fit into our community.
Want to give the college students a reason to come back, or a sense of belonging in the community as well, having that connection between the city and the college.
Seems like that's kind of a barrier. Yeah. So I'm gonna kind of keep going through this list here, but I think that's covers the first two bullet points there about, density, looking at, how we want to accommodate more. And it seems like not really extreme either way, but kind of taking that middle approach is kind of what I'm hearing.
One of the reasons we're not seeing a lot of higher density is the fact that and I think probably that there's a parking, you need one parking spot per unit, and we've maintained that. Not every municipality does that. And I think it's important to continue to do that, because obviously in the winter, we have issues with maintaining streets, and parking is an issue in a lot of neighborhoods. I don't, in terms of trying to get super high density, I think it's gonna be tough if we maintain the park.
Right. Yep.
Do we need to maintain the parking though, if we start advocating for alternative, like, I mean, this is a tiny town, it's a walkable town. There's, you could feasibly live here without a car. I did while I was a college student. And I had a kid in tow, and I still, for periods of time, would be without a car. It's doable, like,
But you
and that's also a lot of empty concrete that is,
have a lot of students who are traveling from the outside areas with their car to go to school here,
And
and
they
even if
park
they're
it.
walking somewhere, they gotta park it somewhere.
Yeah.
So you still have that. And yeah, when the snow happens or whatever, and people are parking pretty much in the middle of the street because there's a berm, then you can't get, you know, the fire truck.
right,
It at least helps offset some of that by having that availability to park off street. It still sometimes doesn't seem like enough when you're bringing all those kids close to the campus and some of those neighborhoods that are close to the campus.
oh gosh, yeah, well, because people will park there if they don't even live here. It's free. It's a thing for the-
Like around Cheney. When you get cars all along the way on both sides, there isn't a space for you to bike and
Safely.
for cars to go by safely. You know, so that's another reason I think we need to maintain, you know, the off-street parking is to make it a nice bikeable.
Well, could we also look at doing the protected bike lanes where there's the barrier, that median, basically, at least in some spots. Explore.
I think these things too, I think you want to make sure you take to the public in your comp plan update. Cause I think those are questions getting, you know, down to that level of, you know, what the community wants. So I think those are really good questions, but I was gonna say too that, you know, whether you want to keep one space per dwelling unit or make that more flexible depending on what you hear from the community. There's always options in between that too, saying, okay, we're gonna do transit nodes of where we don't require that, or we require less, or we don't require that in our mixed use zone or something like that. So it doesn't have to be across the board, but again, I would say some more outreach on that is always
It's
good.
like I say, it's just an issue since the time I've been on the planning commission. And
Yeah,
it's,
no,
and
I'm-
it's not
I'm-
one parking spot, you know, it's one parking spot that. So there's a lot of that. I would argue at least 95% of college students that come here have a vehicle.
So again, I think it's probably not getting to that level in this particular report, but I think looking at what its impact for general land use is important to consider.
And so we talked about off and on, and it seems to get dismissed in the decision making is that one of the things that would help people who to not take their cars out as often would be if we had a few small places in the community where commerce could be that isn't on First Street much.
Yeah. Like neighborhood
Yeah, well, I mean,
corner
at
corner
one point,
shops or
even
something.
one of the developers wanted to put a little coffee shop and it's apartment complex. I was like, oh, people are gonna drive to the coffee. No, they're not gonna drive to the coffee shop.
Because it's
People who
walkable.
live there, get coffee there, the people who are walking past there, you get to campus are gonna get coffee there. Nobody's gonna drive to that spot, that apartment complex to get coffee, you know, but. So anyway, and
Yeah.
so I think that was a lost opportunity. It could have been a good example of some commerce mixed in with the neighborhood. And so I think that real now finding a couple places. I mean, if we can get to work once and demonstrate that it's not a giant impact necessarily, or it doesn't have to be an impact on the neighborhood if it's done properly. And, you know.
Right.
And then, there's an opportunity, you don't have to get in your car to go sort of, from the coffee shop
Mhm. Right.
or whatever. Something that's-
Mhm.
yeah.
Boutique, cafe, yep, kind of those types of things. For sure. Yeah. Any other thoughts on that? I think also just getting your opinion on, if you're if we're looking at potentially, we're not gonna necessarily run out of space if we continue status quo growth in those 20 years. But another option that we haven't talked about yet is rezoning, looking at, okay, do we have we have more capacity in our employment-based lands, in our commercial and especially industrial. Is there any consideration for rezoning or looking at, redesignating some of that land for residential? Is that on the table or off the table, or don't know?
Brett could probably speak to this, but I think mixed use is only allowed in certain commercial districts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
One building block, going to get more residential upstairs in the C2 zone is not. How would we look at zone? In some areas, we do have a overlay with that to allow for more flexibility in C2 zone. But one of the challenges is part of the industrial, we have some light industrial that has not. For the business part, then we have various lanes over there. But it has a challenge, it doesn't develop out here cheap, just because we are a bit off. As things develop at the airport, it will eventually develop out here. So it may not be 5 or 10 years out. But we do need to be careful. We pull too much industrial out to meet our residential needs. And then the demand comes in later on for more commercial or industrial or employment, we won't have that available. And it will be tougher to expand our UGA employment needs only. We really have to base our expansion of UGA based upon resident growth. That's kind of the challenge. And as Dorothy showed here, on the west side of Chico, west of the University of Georgia, ag lanes. And on the north side, showing you rural traditional. Yeah, rural traditional. That's challenging to develop into as well, because it's the county wings. So this, if we take up the UGA on the south, on the train tracks, which I fully understand, it's not gonna be a slam dunk to the west. So we're just kind of our geography down here is experiences.
So I think, back to your point, that's about mixed use. So looking at, because right now you have mixed use as a separate zone. And it's allowed in C1. You don't currently have any mixed use zones, or one now.
We have one now, we have on the books, but we have one actual one.
Right. So, you could look at making mixed use, allowed in other zones like C2 or, kind of, or even some residential areas or something like that. So you could kind of expand the capability of mixed use. And that could take the form of, you change to a mixed use overlay and you put an overlay in. If that overlays on whatever zone, the underlying zone still applies, but there's different flexibilities because it's in that mixed use zone. So those are all things that I think are good to look at in the comp plan process. But I think if you want to help support that, that is a strategy to help accommodate more development in general. Because like you said, you're getting employment and residential on the same lot. So is there general consensus that mixed use, kind of expanding the capability of mixed use is a good thing, or expanding your ability to have mixed use in more areas?
Rezone, we're allowing limited commercial. We settled on how many square footage it was. 2,500 square foot. But I agree that, you know, more mixed use is specifically in the C2 zone.
Mhm.
Yeah, maybe in a limited use, but. You know, expanding this use.
Yeah. And in light industrial, you just want to make sure that you're looking at compatibility with residential and land and industrial, so. Yep, yeah. So I'll share kind of our next steps here since we're nearing 8, but I'm happy to continue this discussion if you want, but I was just gonna share, so we'll look to, I'll regroup with staff after tonight, and we'll talk about kind of some takeaways from this meeting tonight, and refine the buildable lands analysis. So there's still time to kind of tweak things, change some assumptions. Looking to have that refined within a couple weeks. Yes.
Yes, I'd like to see, based on current zoning, what the potential new units as of tomorrow could be going against the set.
Yeah. New units as of tomorrow, like the ones that are,
Right now, there's no foundation.
right, so the ones that are coming online but not online yet.
Well, again, they could be preliminary plat or it could just be vacant land that might, I mean, it seems like we're kicking out some land that had 5,000, figure number was $5,000.
Right, right.
17 acres.
Right.
I'm just saying, in the city limits, based on current zoning.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Those units could be based on today.
Yes. So I think I might even have that number already. I only presented the land use today, but I can, so the report that was sent out to should have some numbers on that, but if it's not what you're looking for, let me know and I'll also talk with staff about that. So we'll kind of look to get some draft recommendations ready and kind of the final report in November. And we want to come back to this group, do another round of this, looking at what the recommendations were. So this is more, what should the recommendations be? Process that, develop the final report draft, come to this group and discuss and say, did we hit the target? What else do we need to adjust here? So we'll be looking to do that probably late November, December time. And then get you a final draft shortly after that. That's kind of the general plan. Any other questions or comments for tonight? Happy to.
I would just say that, you know, in the meantime, since this is a draft, if there's anything that comes up when you're reading through that draft report, please share that with staff so that we can build that into the final. And I also wanted to mention, I know this is the City Council Planning Commission workshop, but I was interjecting a little bit earlier, so I apologize for doing that. Well, it's your meeting, so it's still big. This stuff can, there's some passion here. This is 20 years of our passion about where we're going.
Could you pull up that future land use of buildable lands? Slide, just real quick.
Slide.
This slide.
Yes. That's probably not. So this one looks at future land use. It blacks out all of the non-buildable areas.
It may just be that it's October, but I think I see evil.
It looks a little evil. It looks a little sinister. Uh-huh. Uh-huh. You see, I see it. I keep seeing a face right here. You gotta get that out of the city.
That is a map, isn't it? Well, I think Todd's got something to say before we keep going, or?
Folks, thank you for coming, but everything that I heard today, take a look at, we talked about comprehensive plan. As decision makers here, the comprehensive plan is one, the zoning is one. Take a look at the zoning map, the zoning requirements, the development standards. And just put yourself in the place of maybe a developer, read those zones, read those areas, see if everything makes sense, or if there's something that we could be looking at differently as we look over the next 20 years. Because sometimes we get into zone, I think I have the zone way back in the eighties. So we tend to get busy with our lives. We see these old zones, and we're not really up to the time. So this is a good chance to take a look in 2020 at the comprehensive plan. That's why you're here. That's why you're receiving. There are the decision makers, policy makers, and not only the comprehensive plan, but also the zoning regulations. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Hey, Mayor.
Thanks, Aaron. I appreciate it.
Quick,
Mark,
I
go
don't
ahead.
want to put anybody on the spot here, but we do have Eastern Provost,
yes.
Governor Sanderson back there. After hearing the discussion, do you have any thoughts or comments?
Yeah, lots, actually. I think there's a lot of opportunity for the city and the university to strengthen our partnership. As I was talking about, I was hearing about the jobs that are available. Questions were rolling through my brain, talking about the housing and how Eastern can contribute to that, rolling through my brain. I know we got a couple of empty dorms. And thinking about, as we think about what to do with our housing, I know that we will wrap ourselves at the city at the on next steps on that one. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
Eastern's already contributed a lot to this conversation. Aaron McCarr is actually Eastern.
Go Eats.
There you go.
Well, thank you all very much. Final comments?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, I'll conclude this meeting.
okay, that's.
It's nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Nice. Good luck.